Hello, it's Maxine Harley. Welcome to you and thanks for being here. I hope you'll stay until the end as I've got some free gifts for you. There's no sales pitch here, I just want to share and explain some things that might strike a chord and resonate with you and your own experiences. And later I'll briefly mention what I've created in response, and I hope these will also be of interest to you. I'll be talking about how you can beat the odds and recover from your troubled childhood. But first let me give you a little bit of my own backstory. After having had an abusive childhood myself, for years afterwards I behaved in ways that carried on that abuse. I didn't treat myself well, and my attempts at relationships were a reflection of that. It took me having a child of my own and being a single parent struggling on benefits to realise that for her sake I had to find a way to change the pattern and not, through ignorance, pass on to her what had been passed down to me. It's a long story, but it's resulted in me becoming a counsellor in 1995 and a psychotherapist with a master's degree in 2002, and supervising the work of other therapists from 2003. I've worked with hundreds of people over thousands of hours, and I've identified the gaps that exist in what counselling, therapy and coaching have to offer. I've created my own methods to fill those gaps, and I feel compelled to help others to also grow and thrive beyond their own early experiences and conditioning. Now let me ask you a question. Are you one of the 67%? Or maybe even one of the 25%? I am one of the 25%, and I'll say more about that in a moment. I'm going to share with you some concepts, facts and figures, for those who like them, as well as how you too can overcome the cards you've been dealt in life and to beat the odds that were stacked against you. I'll show you what you need to do to use your cards to win the jackpot. A jackpot that includes happier, loving relationships, both with yourself and others. If you have children, it includes you becoming the parent they need you to be. If you're working or in business, it includes you no longer getting in the way of your own success. Let's go back to the beginning. Research tells us that the first 1,000 days of a baby's life are crucial for their personality development. This is calculated from birth up to about 3 years, during which time there's a massive growth in the child's brain cells. But brain cells begin forming from 3 weeks after conception, and the unborn child is impacted by influences such as the physical and emotional state of the mother and the environment she lives in. A baby's born with about 2,500 brain synapses. These are the gaps between brain cells which allow for the passage of information. By the age of 3, this has increased to 15,000. The rarely used synapses are then pruned off and eliminated from the age of 3, and more again in adolescence. In an ideal world, a baby's wanted, loved and cherished, and their brain develops accordingly. But sadly, many things can get in the way of that happening. I've identified 5 types of parenting styles, each of which has a profound effect upon the baby, child and adult they'll become, and the style of emotional attachment they develop, whether it's chaotic and disorganised, insecure or secure, as each of these styles plays a vital role in the child's future development, career, relationships and well-being. It's important to say here that parents usually do the best they know how, but in too many cases that falls short of what a baby and a child really need. The 5 types of parenting I've identified are terrible and terrifying. This is the extreme end of the spectrum. Parents have profound mental health problems and personality disorders. There are addictions, chaos, intentional violence and sexual and physical abuse, and physical and emotional neglect of the child or children, which can even result in their death. Most of the families of the teenagers I fostered a few years ago were in this category, and the children were very psychologically and emotionally fragmented and often went on to repeat history. Many had attempted suicide to try and put a stop to their emotional agony. The child is lucky to survive in this family and will probably develop a personality disorder or mental health problems of their own as a result of growing up in this sort of environment. Next we have the nowhere near good enough families. These are the parents who often don't get picked up by the authorities, and the child suffers in silence without rescue. The parents play mind games and confuse the child. They're cold and cruel with harsh discipline and punishments without explanation. They exert control and authority without flexibility, or maybe the child had this at boarding school. The child's treated like an object to meet someone else's needs. Abuse exists, but it's hidden, and children are forbidden to tell anyone. The The child feels isolated, helpless, and learns to hide away within themselves and not to expect love or care. I had this myself. The child's traumatised by the abuse and neglect and has difficulty fitting in with peers or forming good, loving relationships. The not good enough parents. This is the overlooked form of abuse, where the child doesn't feel loved for who they are. They may have had well-meaning parents who bought them lots of toys, they went to good schools, they had great holiday destinations, but the parents didn't spend time with the child, maybe due to their work, ill health, grieving, or other family commitments. Perhaps the parents were too busy arguing, bickering, or scoring points against one another. In this category, I'd also put the smother mother or father, who's too intrusive and controlling, leaving little headspace for the child to develop their own identity. And then there are those pushy parents who give the child far too much direction, and their own narcissism gets in the way of them putting their child's need first. They may have had material things, but the child didn't feel loved or emotionally connected with. As an adult, they may claim to have had a happy childhood because they learnt not to be aware of what they didn't get: time, attention, and emotional connection. As adults, they may have difficulty with emotional intelligence and maintaining their relationships, perhaps being either too needy or too distant, and so they get the very thing they dread: their partners leave them. If they find someone who had a similar background, they may well antagonise one another, or, rarely, become aware enough of their wounds to work together to make things better, but it can be a slow and costly process when professional help's involved. If a child from this background is lucky enough to find a partner who came from a happier, more loving family, they may test the relationship to breaking point. In the best scenario, the partner may be resilient enough to weather the many storms and help the wounded child in their partner to heal by offering their love, tolerance, and patience. Next, we have the good enough families. This is about doing the best you can with what you know and have, and feeling good enough as a person to be a good enough parent. Ideally, there's enough emotional bonding and being attuned to the child's needs, even before they're expressed. There's also encouraging of emotional intelligence, to be able to name, understand, and manage emotions, and to form good emotional connections with their peers. Emotional intelligence is a greater predictor of happiness and success than IQ. A child grows up feeling good about themselves, they do well at school and in peer relationships, and they go on to have good adult relationships, develop a solid career and become good parents themselves. Finally, at the top end of the spectrum, we have optimum parenting. This is the category I've identified and named. The parents are actively sorting through their own deck of cards and cleaning and repairing them so they can provide their child with the optimum childhood experience, as well as developing strength and resilience. This family has all of the facets of the good enough family and a bit more by optimizing their emotional availability for the child. They focus on becoming consciously aware of themselves and their behaviour. They develop an inner observing and guiding self, a vital extra part of themselves which can reflect, learn and grow. They're great role models, and the child's happy future is secured. Now you can imagine the differences in the capacity for emotional attachment in a child from each of these families, and maybe you can identify your own family background here too. I now want to move on to adverse childhood experiences, or ACE, which seems apt, as earlier I used the analogy of a deck of cards being dealt to you. ACE, or Adverse Childhood Experiences. This stems from some research of over 17,000 people between 1995 and 1997 with long-term follow-up. The studies demonstrated an association between adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and long-term health and social problems as adults. It's resulted in more than 50 scientific articles and more than 100 conferences and workshops. The ACE categories. Now you may want to pause this part of the video for a moment to read this list and to work out your own ACE score. Now the 10 categories that they looked at in the research were sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, physical neglect, emotional neglect, domestic violence, mental health problems in the home, imprisonment of a family member, household substance abuse, parental divorce or separation. Results of the ACE research. Now this is where the numbers I mentioned earlier come in. Apparently 67% of people have at least one out of these 10 categories of ACE scores. And 25% of us have 4 or more out of 10. Now, as I said, I'm one of that 25% that has at least 4 of these categories. In fact, I have 6, which only goes to show that you can beat the odds and create a different life than the one handed down to us. Of those of us who did have an ACE score, emotional abuse accounts for 10.6% of people, physical abuse 28.3%, sexual abuse 20.7%, emotional neglect 14.8%, physical neglect 9.9%, mother being treated violently 12.7%, household substance abuse 26.9%, household mental illness 19.4%, parental separation or divorce 23.3%, and the incarceration of a household member, someone in prison, 4.7%. What I think they should have added to the research categories are other traumatic situations for a child, such as the death of a parent, a traumatic accident, being bullied at school, long-term illness, extended absence due to hospitalisation, well-meaning but distracted parents, and talk about more about emotional neglect, special needs siblings, being in the care system, fostered or adopted, parents with eating disorders and or self-harming behaviours, parents with personality disorder traits. From the ACE studies and long-term follow-ups, it was determined that the higher the ACE score, the greater the likelihood of disrupted neurodevelopment, that's brain development, social, emotional and cognitive impairment, more health risk behaviours, disease, disability and social problems, and early death. Don't panic, the odds can be changed. With my own ACE score of 6, which I had no idea about until a few years ago when I came across this research, for my own and my daughter's sake, I took the long and expensive route of 7 years of training, which included over 4 years of psychotherapy. I can now offer you the shortcut so you don't have to do it the long, hard and expensive way. I have to say that I didn't really get much out of all those years of therapy. What proved to be much more helpful, useful and beneficial was a residential weekend I attended which focused upon the inner child. And this has massively shifted my work focus and my life as I reconnected with the source of the pain and the emotional wounds and healed myself from the inside out. Our inner child is the echo or shadow of the child we once were. The child who had to learn how to fit in and get by. The child that may have had to wear a mask to be seen as acceptable by their family and who had to deny their own needs and identity. Look, no one had a perfect child because it doesn't exist. And apparently there's a fortunate 33% of adults who have no ACE scores, which I find hard to believe, particularly if the research in the 90s had included those other categories of emotional trauma I mentioned a moment ago. When we've come out of childhood with an ACE score, we either make the following 3 mistakes or we find a way to avoid making them. And I'll also come on to that in a moment too. The 3 big mistakes that we make that really impact our relationships, children and working life. The first one is we don't heal our emotional wounds. And secondly, we don't take care of our own needs. And thirdly, we don't control ourselves. The effects of these 3 mistakes upon our life. They affect our relationships, and I mean all of our relationships. We become either too much or too little, and we're driven by fear of rejection, loss of control, being vulnerable and being hurt again. These mistakes affect our children, and they affect our working life. I've written an e-booklet for you to have for free from the link below this video. This explains in more detail the effects of the 3 mistakes upon all of our relationships, especially the most important one, the one we have with ourselves. So see how many you can identify with for yourself and see how much of your past has been getting in the way of you having the kind of life you want to have instead. So it's really worth remembering that those of us in the 67% and in the 25%, that there is something we can do about it. We can stop the past from affecting and messing up the future. But is there a solution for us? Yes, there is a solution, and you can instead now select your life. When I say select your life, I mean choose from a range of options. As you might have guessed, the word select is an acronym for a process we need to go through to get from the problematic conditioning of the past to a happier present time and a brighter future. And here's what I mean. Self-awareness. This is what we're like, how we individually perceive things and the sense we make of them. Not necessarily the truth, but our version of it. Awareness of how we process our thoughts, how we talk, how we relate to others, how we react emotionally to people and events or our own thoughts, how we behave and the language we use, and most importantly, the impact we have on other people, our family, our friends, our work colleagues, our staff. Self-awareness is the first step towards change and transformation. Then comes education. It's all very well becoming more self-aware, but without knowing what to do about it, you can be stuck and feeling guilty and ashamed for the way you are. The proper type of education enables you to find out why you are the way you are, understand what makes you tick, and knowing that it can take, on average, 21 days to change the way you see yourself. And again, on average, 66 days to change your behaviour. This is called automaticity. And the 66 days is only an average figure. It can be less or more than this amount of time, until a new behaviour becomes more automatic to do than the old one. The important thing is to make a start. Education also includes understanding the vital role of your brain in your life, and the good news is that neuroscientists have revealed the process called neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to grow and mould itself dependent upon what's required and repeated. We know that the first 6 years of a child's life are crucial for their character and personality, and their subconscious belief system, which is largely in place by then, and with later reinforcements along the way, will be running and perhaps ruining their life as an adult around 90% of the time. The reassuring news from neuroplasticity is that it's never too late to change what you want to change and to rewire your brain. Learning new skills. The next step in the process of changing the hand of cards you've been dealt is the learning of new ways to think, feel, communicate and behave. If you weren't taught these things in the home or school, and who was, then we can make up for this process now by learning how to change these old patterns. This will lead on to the next steps in the process of change, which are emotional intelligence and balance, being able to identify, manage, regulate and properly express emotions, and understand the emotions of other people too. It's about being able to keep your emotions within a healthy bandwidth, not too high and not too low. Emotional intelligence, or EQ, has been shown to be much more significant than IQ when it comes to work and relationship success. Control. Control over your thoughts, how you speak to yourself and others, your emotions and your life. When we have control of ourselves, we have the ability to make better choices in our lives, and we feel more clear about who we are, what we want, and how we'll get it. Transformation, the change you want to see in your own levels of happiness, calmness, and satisfaction with life, and in all of your relationships as a result of the positive ripple effect you're now creating around you. Most of us want our lives to reach this high level, and I'll show and guide you along the way to make this happen for you too. How? After 20 years as a psychotherapist working with a very broad range of problems, I've found out what works, and I've created my own new unique methods to fill the gaps that existed. My own new methods each work with this select process in different formats and costs. Let's recap what I've covered for you so far in this video. Now, first of all, we spoke about the importance of the first 1,000 days of a child's life, which actually begins before then, from the time that they're in the womb. Then I spoke about the 5 different types of parenting and the effects these have upon a child. Then I spoke about the A.C.E research, Adverse Childhood Experiences, the A.C.E scores and their effects upon our lives. The 3 big mistakes that we make that really impact all aspects of our lives, particularly our relationships and our parenting styles and our work life. The solution that I've created for you, select your life, and then the methods that I've created for you too. I do hope you found something of interest here and that you'll take the next steps of your personally transformative journey with me. If you have any questions, please email me at maxine@maxineharley.com, and let's get started on your new and better life, free from the conditioning of the past. It's important that you take good care of the little kid who still lives deep inside you. Listen to what they're trying to say to you and become the parent they wish they'd had. Remember, of all the people you will ever meet, you are the only one that will never leave you. So do your best for yourself and your inner child, and select your life, your way, on your terms. As a thank you for staying to the end, I'd like to give you some free gifts and resources which you can get the links from below. So I'd like to say goodbye and thank you for sharing your time with me. I hope you've found it worthwhile and that you'll let me know if I can be of help to you further. I'll be happy to hear from you.